You and Hillary want to control and restrict and limit gun manufacturers, gun owners, and the responsible use of guns and ammunition to the rest of us, the good guys, instead of holding the bad guys accountable for their actions. And Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to use Chicago, your hometown, a city that has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation, a city that for decades and still is under Democratic control, a city that has an outrageous and even embarrassing murder rate, as my first example. Why can't we round up these thugs, these drug dealers and gang members, and hold them accountable for their actions, or allow the good people in Chicago access to firearms to protect themselves?
Good. All right. Well, let me, it's a multi-part question, so let me just say a couple things. First of all, the notion that I, or Hillary, or Democrats, or whoever you want to choose, are hell-bent on taking away folks' guns is just not true.
President Obama was just getting warmed up. The town hall in his final year in office in 2016 came in the midst of the Trump versus Clinton presidential campaign.
I don't care how many times the NRA says it. I'm about to leave office. There have been more guns sold since I've been president than just about any time in U.S. history. There are enough guns for every man, woman, and child in this country. And at no point have I ever proposed confiscating guns from responsible gun owners. So it's just not true. What I have said is precisely what you suggested, which is why don't we treat this like every other thing that we use? We used to have really bad auto fatality rates. The auto fatality rate has actually dropped precipitously, drastically since I was a kid. Why is that? We decided we had seatbelt laws. We decided to have manufacturers put airbags in place. We decided to crack down on drunk driving and texting. We decided to redesign roads so that they were less likely to have a car bank. We studied what is causing these fatalities using science and data and evidence, and then we slowly treated it like the public health problem it was, and it got reduced. We are not allowed to do any of that when it comes to guns because people, if you propose anything, it is suggested that we're trying to wipe away gun rights and impose tyranny and martial law. Do you know that Congress will not allow the Center for Disease Control to study gun violence? They're not allowed to study it because the notion is that by studying it the same way we do with traffic accidents, somehow that's going to lead to everybody's guns being confiscated. When we talked about background checks, if you buy a car, if you want to get a license, first of all, you got to get a license. You have to take a test. People have to know that you know how to drive. You don't have to do any of that with respect to buying a gun. And when we talked about doing effective background checks, it was resisted because the notion was we were going to take your guns away. I just came from a meeting today in the Situation Room in which I've got people who we know have been on ISIL websites, living here in the United States, U.S. citizens, and we're allowed to put them on the no-fly list when it comes to airlines. But because of the National Rifle Association, I cannot prohibit those people from buying a gun. This is somebody who is a known ISIL sympathizer, and if he wants to walk in to a gun store or a gun show right now and buy as many weapons as ammo as he can, nothing's prohibiting him from doing that, even though the FBI knows who that person is. So, sir, I just have to say respectfully that there is a way for us to have common sense gun laws. There is a way for us to make sure that lawful, responsible gun owners like yourself are able to use it for sporting, hunting, protecting yourself. But the only way we're going to do that is if we don't have a situation in which anything that is proposed is viewed as some tyrannical destruction of the Second Amendment. And that's how the issue too often gets framed.
So this clip captures something that almost never happens in American political discourse. A person walks in with a prepared argument, gets a calm and thorough response to every single point, and has nothing left to say. A Trump supporter shows up to an Obama town hall with the full script. Chicago, strict gun laws. Democrats want your guns. And Obama does not get defensive, does not get flustered, and does not try to win on emotion. He just methodically takes the argument apart using the simplest possible comparison. Cars. I will give you my full take at the end. Let's watch this. All right, so if you just watched that and felt like you were watching a debate where one side brought a checklist and the other brought a framework, That is exactly the difference on display. Let me break down what Obama is actually doing here because the technique is as important as the substance. The Trump supporter opens with a classic formulation. You want to control guns instead of holding bad guys accountable. And then he uses Chicago as his example of why gun laws do not work. It is the most predictable opening in the gun debate, and Obama treats it as such. He does not take the bait on Chicago specifically. He does not get into the weeds of specific policies. He does not argue about which state has which law. He goes straight to the foundation of the entire debate, the claim that Democrats want to confiscate guns, and he dismantles it with one number. More guns were sold during his presidency than almost any comparable period in American history. If he wanted to take the guns, he had 8 years and the guns just kept multiplying. The confiscation narrative collapses under its own logic. Then comes the car comparison, and this is the part that has kept this clip in circulation for nearly a decade because it is that clean. Obama is not comparing guns to cars or saying they are the same thing. He is making a point about how Americans approach dangerous tools in general. With cars, nobody claims it is tyranny to require a license. Nobody calls airbags a government overreach. Nobody says seatbelt laws are the first step toward martial law. We accepted all of those things because cars can kill people, and we decided that regulating dangerous tools to reduce deaths is a reasonable societal function. The gun debate is the one exception in American life where that basic logic breaks down, not because the underlying principle is different, but because the fear marketing around guns has been so successful that any proposal, no matter how modest, gets framed as confiscation. And then there is the CDC point, which is the one that should genuinely infuriate people across the political spectrum. Congress has blocked the Centers for Disease Control from researching gun violence as a public health issue. The same agency that studies car crashes, drownings, food contamination, and every other cause of preventable death in America is legally barred from applying that same methodology to gun violence. Obama does not say that research would lead to specific policy outcomes. He just points out that blocking the research is itself an admission. If the evidence would support your position, you would want it studied. You only block the research when you are afraid of what it might show. And then he closes with the no-fly list example, which is the one that exposes the internal contradiction in the anti-regulation position most clearly. At the time of this town hall, people on the no-fly list, people the FBI had already flagged as potential terrorism risks, people who could not board a commercial aircraft, were still legally able to walk into a gun store and purchase weapons without any additional scrutiny. Obama says he came directly from a Situation Room meeting where this came up. The government could prevent a known ISIL sympathizer from boarding a plane, but could not prevent them from buying an arsenal. And the reason was not constitutional principle, it was NRA lobbying. That is the contradiction that has never been answered with a coherent policy argument, because there is not one. What makes this clip powerful is not that Obama wins the argument on every specific policy point. It is that he demonstrates what happens when you apply the same standards to guns that Americans apply to every other dangerous product or activity without any protest. And the only coherent response to that framework is to argue that guns are categorically different from everything else, which is a harder case to make in public than it sounds when you spell out the comparison explicitly. Here is my take. The gun debate in America has been frozen for decades by a deliberate strategy of treating any regulation as total confiscation. Obama names that strategy directly and refuses to engage with the caricature. He responds to the actual policy proposals on their actual merits and shows how similar interventions have worked in other contexts. That is not a liberal argument or a conservative argument. It is just what happens when you take the fear out of the equation and apply basic logic. The clip circulates because most people watching it can see exactly what happened and exactly why the other side did not have a response. You cannot argue against a framework. You can only argue about specifics. And Obama never gave the specifics enough room to get lost in. I really appreciate you watching. Make sure to check out this one. If you want more breakdowns like this, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me what you think.